So you're keeping track of the big shifts shaping our world, right? Things like trade, geopolitics, always changing.
Mhm.
Well, here's something really interesting where these things cross over. Climate change. It's causing huge problems everywhere, we know that.
Absolutely. A
But,
massive global
but
challenge.
at the same time, it's kind of opening up this potentially game-changing trade route up in the Arctic. It's quite the paradox. Let's delve into that.
Indeed. It really is a compelling situation where, this huge environmental change is actually creating um, new avenues for strategy and economics.
Right.
So today, our deep dive is going to focus specifically on India. India's growing interest and its strategic moves in this really rapidly changing Arctic region.
Okay.
We'll be looking particularly at the opportunities and, well, the challenges around the Northern Sea Route, the NSR, and the very delicate diplomatic path India has to walk.
Exactly. And we're pulling the key insights from some excerpts we've analyzed, aiming to give you a clear picture of India's Arctic ambitions.
Yeah, cutting through the noise.
Think of it as your sort of concise guide. Why does this icy place, thousands of miles away, actually matter for India's future? We're talking trade, geopolitics, even how climate change there affects things back home.
Mm,
And this is really crucial stuff, especially if you're prepping for exams like the UPSC or honestly just aiming to be properly informed on global shifts.
absolutely essential context. So where should we start? Maybe with the Arctic itself, how it's changing.
Yeah, let's set the scene. The Arctic we maybe learned about in school, it's transforming fast.
It really is. Our sources really hammer this home. The impact of climate change is profound. Just look at NASA's data.
What does it say?
It points to a pretty stark reality. Since 1981, the September sea ice extent, that's like the minimum ice cover each year, has decreased by 12.2% per decade.
Wow, per decade. That's not slow.
Not at all. It's a dramatic alteration of the Arctic landscape. And a direct result of this ice melt is that the northern sea route is becoming much more viable.
Right, the NSR, that passage along Russia's northern coast.
Exactly. As the ice recedes, it offers a significantly shorter way to get ships between Europe and Asia. We're talking potentially thousands of nautical miles shorter.
And days off the transit time, too, I imagine, which means cost savings.
Big potential cost savings. And you can see this isn't just theoretical. Look at the shipping volumes on the NSR.
Oh.
In 2010, it was tiny, just 41,000 tons.
Almost nothing, commercially speaking.
Right. Fast forward to 2024, the estimate is nearly 38 million tons.
38 million. That's
Yeah.
that's an incredible jump. It's exponential, really.
It absolutely is. It underlines just how important this route is becoming. And India, naturally, has been watching this very closely.
Okay, so India's paying attention, but this isn't like a brand new interest that just popped up, is it?
No, not at all. That's a good point. India's connection to the Arctic actually goes back quite a way.
How far back?
Well, India was one of the original signatories to the Svalbard Treaty, way back in 1920.
1920. Okay, so there's a historical precedent for engagement, even if it wasn't always perhaps front and center.
Exactly. It shows a long-held interest. And that engagement has definitely ramped up in more recent years.
How so?
Well, a key step was establishing India's own Arctic research base, Himadri.
Ah, yes, Himadri, having a physical presence there.
It's crucial. It gives India a permanent scientific foothold, allowing for really vital research on the ground.
And this research isn't just about, Arctic science for its own sake, right? It connects back to India.
Absolutely. Our sources highlight this clearly. Indian scientists at Himadri are studying how Arctic changes influence things like India's monsoon patterns.
The monsoons, wow.
Yes, and agricultural cycles too. It really brings home how connected these global climate systems are. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic.
That's a powerful link. So recognizing this growing importance, India formalized its approach.
Yes, exactly. India released its official Arctic policy in 2022.
Okay, so there's a policy document now.
Right. It provides a framework, the guiding principles. But, the critical next step is turning those principles into concrete, actionable strategies.
The implementation challenge. Having a policy is one thing, actually making it happen is another.
Precisely. But there does seem to be some momentum.
Like what?
Well, the budget for 2025-26 includes a pretty substantial allocation, $3 billion for a maritime development fund.
$3 billion. That sounds significant. Is that specifically linked to the Arctic?
It seems directly aimed at building up capacity, including potentially for Arctic-ready shipbuilding. Vessels that can handle the ice and the harsh conditions up there.
Right, specialized ships, ice-class vessels.
Exactly. And there's also the upcoming Arctic Circle India Forum. That's happening in New Delhi in May 2025.
Okay, a dedicated forum.
Yeah, it's seen as a really vital opportunity, a platform to push for implementing the policy, build partnerships, and really advance India's Arctic agenda.
So a lot happening. The Arctic's changing, India's stepping up its game with policy, funding, research, but it's not operating in a vacuum up there, is it? The
Yeah.
geopolitics must be incredibly complex.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Navigating the Arctic's geopolitical landscape is, well, it's a maze. It's multifaceted.
Who are the main players India needs to consider? Russia, obviously.
Russia is huge, yes. Geographically dominant, with that massive Arctic coastline and a lot of existing infrastructure.
And India already works with Russia in some areas.
Yes, there's an existing bilateral working group specifically focused on the NSR, and also the Chennai-Vladivostok Maritime Corridor Initiative. So there's already a basis for cooperation there.
Okay, so that seems like a natural partnership avenue, especially for developing the NSR. But things are rarely that simple, are they? What about other powers? China?
China.
Yeah.
Yes, that adds a whole other layer of complexity. China has its own big Arctic ambitions, framed under its Polar Silk Road Initiative.
Part of their Belt and Road strategy, but for the Arctic.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Creating new sea and land routes globally, including through the Arctic. Now, here's the tricky part for India.
Go on.
While India engaging with the NSR seems like its own thing, focused on trade and logistics,
Right.
there's a perspective that it could, perhaps inadvertently, end up lending support to China's broader strategic goals in the region.
How so? By normalizing activity or...
Partly that, and maybe by creating infrastructure or patterns that China could also leverage. It's a crucial consideration for India, especially given, the existing difficulties and tensions in the India-China bilateral relationship.
Right, that's a really delicate balancing act. Cooperate with Russia on a useful route, but risk indirectly boosting a strategic rival.
Exactly. It's a fine line. But then on the other hand, leaning too heavily towards the Western bloc, say, the U.S. and its allies, also comes with potential downsides.
Such as?
Well, it could potentially jeopardize India's access to Arctic resources. A lot of the potential resources, energy, minerals, are in areas effectively under Russian control or influence. Alienating Moscow could close doors.
So caught between a rock and a hard place, almost. Lean towards Russia, you complicate things with China and potentially the West. Lean towards the West, you might lose access via Russia.
It paints that kind of strategic quandary, yes. Which leads to the question, is there another way, a kind of third path for India?
What might that look like?
Well, one idea being floated is closer collaboration with other like-minded nations. Think Japan, South Korea.
Why them specifically?
They share some of India's concerns about China's growing Arctic presence. They're also major maritime nations interested in stable sea lanes and perhaps in a more, let's say, inclusive Arctic governance structure, like the Arctic Council.
Okay, so building coalitions with countries that have similar interests and concerns in the Arctic. That makes sense. A way to pursue its interests without getting locked into one of the major power blocks exclusively.
It's a potential strategy, yeah. Diversifying partnerships.
So pulling all these threads together, the changing environment, India's growing engagement, the complex geopolitics, what are the main takeaways? The key strategic things India really needs to focus on now.
Okay, well, first, the commercial promise of the NSR is clearly there. It's substantial. But actually realizing that potential, that demands serious technological investment and really smart strategic planning from India.
Not just dipping a toe in, but a committed approach.
Exactly. The sources emphasize this need to move decisively from just having the policy written down to actually implementing concrete actions, turning principles into practice.
So less talk, more action. What kind of actions are we talking about?
Investing in that critical Arctic-ready infrastructure we mentioned. Those ice-class ships are essential. Developing ports, maybe megaports, capable of handling this kind of traffic and these specialized vessels.
Infrastructure is key. What else? Diplomacy.
Absolutely crucial. Active participation in multilateral forums, the dialogues around Arctic governance, making sure India's voice is heard and its interests are represented within those structures, strengthening its diplomatic muscle in the region.
And I recall one specific suggestion from the sources about signaling India's commitment more clearly.
Yes, that was an interesting one. The idea of appointing a dedicated polar ambassador.
A polar ambassador.
Yeah. Someone whose specific job it is to focus on Arctic and maybe Antarctic affairs. It would provide a clear point person, a dedicated voice to really articulate and push India's specific interests on the global stage related to the polar regions.
That would certainly send a strong signal about how seriously India is taking this.
It would. It underlines that this isn't just a side issue anymore.
So it really feels like India is at this crucial point, doesn't it, where its economic growth plans, its worries about climate change impacts back home, and its big picture diplomatic strategy are all kind of converging in the Arctic.
Absolutely. It's a nexus point. And thinking long term, it raises fascinating questions. Given how fast climate change is moving and how quickly the geopolitical plates are shifting, what's going to be the most significant long-term impact of India's Arctic policy? How will it really shape India's global standing and maybe even its own domestic development down the line?
That's a really profound question to ponder, especially, as you said, for those studying India's future trajectory, perhaps for the UPSC exams, or just anyone trying to understand where India fits in the changing world order.
Exactly. A lot to watch in the coming years.
Definitely. A great deal to consider as that Arctic ice keeps melting and the global map keeps getting redrawn in a way. We really hope this deep dive has given you a clearer, more comprehensive understanding of what's driving India's Arctic ambitions and the complexities and opportunities involved.
The challenges ahead.
Yes. And if you found this analysis useful, maybe for your UPSC prep or just for your own knowledge, please do give us a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and definitely leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts or any further questions you might have on this really critical topic.
And just to reiterate, our discussion today was based on excerpts we analyzed from.
That's right. All the information and perspectives we covered came directly from our reading of excerpts from the Hindu. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.